Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Webinar Wednesday. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming back to the webinar Insight Provider Devi Subhakesan, and we'll go over with her the latest stock moves of Beyond Meat, one of the premier manufacturers of alternative protein, and the long-term outlook for the company after the challenges faced by the F&B sector worldwide, a sector, of course, that has been one of the primary customers for products of Beyond and similar companies. Devi is an equity analyst with an Asia consumer sector focus. She has been part of the buy side and sell side and has covered oil, gas, and coal, media, textiles, and consumer discretionary sectors across ASEAN, India, and North Asia. Devi, welcome to the webinar once again.
Hi, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on Beyond Meat. Specifically, we'll discuss the company's long-term outlook as well as the outlook for the sector. We'll start off with a quick overview on how the alternative protein segment has evolved over the period and how it has been driving consumer interest. And then we'll look at Beyond Meat, specifically from an equity and business perspective. And finally, we'll wrap up with a quick summary of what we think about the stock and the valuation. Now, alternative protein may sound new, but it is not a novel idea, especially in Asia, where we've had tofu and tempeh, which are essentially soya-based, which is plant-based protein. And it has been traced back to Buddhist monasteries in China more than 2,000 years ago. But mock meat is relatively newer compared to tofu and tempeh. It cannot really be called an innovation because it's essentially soya pellets in different shapes and colors and flavors, trying to faintly remind you of what the meat it's trying to replace. Last time I tried it, which was many, many years ago, I didn't want to have it again. I'm a flexitarian, if I can use the right word. So then when plant-based meat, which personally I noticed only with the Beyond Meat IPO in 2019, the stock debuted and tripled on debut, in fact. Obviously, it was a very small stock, but then tripling on debut in a year where you had much high-profile IPOs like Uber happening, the stock got noticed. And I read about it. I went through the IPO document and I could connect with what he was saying because Ethan Brown was speaking the language which many youngsters were already talking. They were saying this, they were quite aware about climate change. They were aware about ocean pollution, ocean depletion, much more than those in my age group knew. So he was talking that language and I could connect with what he was saying. And that's when I started covering Beyond Meat. Now we stand in 2021 where lab-based meat is more the in thing, and Singapore is one of the first countries to approve lab-based meat. We don't know when it will be commercially viable, but it will be it will be launched in Singapore soon, which brings me to another important point that we need to keep in mind, the perspective. All this discussion is pretty much ado about so little, I would say, because compared to the size of meat market globally, plant-based meat is just a tiny little drop in an ocean. Does that mean it's irrelevant? No, the movement is pretty strong. If you go through any kind of food trends, plant-based comes up very strongly. And as we know, what happened last year when a lot more customers tried out plant-based meat because the association animal products had with the pandemic. Now, the chart on the right shows you plant-based milk, which is something I personally thought was a fad when it started. Why would I want to drink milk which is made out of rice or oat or ground up nuts? But then it's not how it worked. The market has steadily grown. And today it is 14%, and I think some studies say it's even 20% of the milk market. US consumption of dairy products, the actual dairy products, have consistently fallen since the 80s. So compared to that, when we look at what has happened in the milk space, it is quite rational to assume that the meat space can or has room to grow much more than where it is right now. Let's move on to the discussion on whether we think the whole discussion about is it a fad or a trend? You have numbers here. These are all several surveys that come out. But to me, what has changed the trajectory in this discussion is From being a cool thing to do, it has kind of become the right thing as more discussion on climate change, the impact that livestock rearing has on greenhouse gas emissions, all that take front stage. And social media has actively taken up this cause. We have plant-based food now not really talked as vegan anymore. Somehow vegan is associated with a different kind of lifestyle. So plant-based food is now seen as the right thing to do, but it has its own issue. Vegan diet, which is having zero animal products, always, at least in the Western world, had this issue of not having sufficient protein. Where do we get the protein from? From where I come from, India, it is a population of 1 billion. And almost all of them are flexitarians, though the word never existed, because the normal Indian diet is predominantly plant-based, and the protein came from lentils. Occasionally, there is animal products. Only 30% of the population is actually pure vegetarians, means they will not eat meat, but they'll still have dairy. So that is a sustainable diet. That is something where you can evolve eventually. But the Western diet didn't have as much lentils in the diet as regular. So that brought us to what is driving the change in food preferences. The strongest value proposition, especially among Generation Z and millennial customers, has been the better for you and better for planet when it comes to making personal purchase decisions. Social media has played a big part in reinforcing it. If you can try, you can Google Beyond's and plant-based diet. You could end up being a convert too. She has documented with videos the entire transformation from being overweight after giving birth to her kids to her relaunch or her re-entry to the field by following a plant-based diet, and of course backed up with a lot of workout and guidance from a nutritionist. But presents a very convincing argument why it has made her more energetic. So what I'm trying to say is that you have influencers from Bill Clinton to Beyond who are successful role models for today's public, arguing in favor of plant-based diet. Game Changers is a program on Netflix, which I would not have noticed if not for Virat Kohli, who is a famous Indian cricketer. He was the Indian cricket captain, who said he switched from a animal-based diet to plant-based diet, and it has made him stronger and more energetic. So I still have not seen any strong academic studies saying this is so, but the general feeling amongst public is that many of our health issues are because of eating too much animal products. So this consumer perception and consumer value of health and wellness, and also for better for planet, which is well documented. And lastly, when it comes to animal rights, in some ways related to how humans and the interaction with animals have evolved over time. A survey on pet adoption and pet keepers showed that more than 75% of them do not identify themselves as pet owners. They call them either a pet parent or pet his family. So these three arguments work well when Beyond Meat launched. At that time, it wasn't as strong, but in the 5 to 6 years since the launch and 10 years since they've been working on, the whole arguments that Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods put forward as a rationale for why this product has worked well, has fitted in well with this segment of younger customers or younger, aware and conscious customers. If you look at the lower part, the bottom part, Beyond has gone one step further to say that they are non-GMO. There's no genetically modified ingredient. They have no soy or gluten. Now, soy is a commonly consumed product in Asia, but in many Western countries, it's classified almost together with peanut as an allergen. These are arguments which sets Beyond differently from Impossible Foods. A discussion on Beyond is incomplete without referring to Impossible Foods, because both were launched in the same year, started by persons with a research background. They're more academicians than businessmen when they started this. They even share the same surname, and are backed by a similar set of investors who believed in this value proposition than the financial angle to the whole business. The difference is, however, Beyond chose to go retail first. an easier way to start, I would say, but difficult to grow. But one factor that differentiated it was the company's insistence that its products be stocked along with meat products and not in the vegan section. It quickly gave the company the product visibility amongst the wider shopping population, those who now identify themselves as flexitarians, and induced trials without incurring too much cost. And now we have campaigns like Meatless Mondays, which gathered momentum. So a flexitarian would probably choose Beyond for that day. Impossible, on the other hand, went for a counterintuitive strategy. So they went institutional first, something that one would have thought is a difficult market to crack. But it helped them build up scale quite quickly with restaurants that recognize that they're missing out on vegetarian and health conscious clientele. So if you go out as a group, especially where you socially, you eat out on social occasions, and if you have one person who's a vegan, then you will have to skip place like McDonald's, which doesn't offer a vegan product or a vegetarian product, in fact, in most markets. So personally, I am forced to go to Burger King because my younger son eats only vegetarian. Else we would have probably chosen some other place, but Burger King offers you a barbecue veggie burger. So that is a market which kind of quickly caught up with the value proposition that Impossible offered. The key factor which also helped improving visibility is that Impossible insisted on exclusive tie-ups and co-branding of products. So if you go to Burger King, which sells Impossible, it will say they're selling Impossible Whopper, and there'll be a big banner put next to it. So public knew about Impossible without a single newspaper advertisement. It came totally through PR and these little banners. Both of them are now trying to eat into each other's original segments. Beyond is trying to widen its reach in the institutional segment, while Impossible is trying to hit the retail shelves. There is a little glitch in here in the sense that there's an international market where Impossible is available in Singapore, is available in Hong Kong and most of Southeast Asia, but they cannot access China nor Europe, because Europe has banned products with GM content in terms of food, and China requires you to take special approval on a case-by-case basis, which Impossible is trying to get but still haven't. So when it comes to growth potential, we expect Beyond's next leg of growth to come by tying up with more institutional clients. It can be a roller coaster ride. We saw a few months ago when the McDonald's tie-up didn't work out and there was enough confusion in the market, the stock tanked. And a few weeks ago when Taco Bell announced that they will be going with Beyond, the stock went up 20% in 2 days' time. So, but still there is still room. The game is on. I think the advantage Beyond will have here is that it caters to the vegan market, which is mostly also anti-soy, anti-gluten, and anti-GM. So that's the advantage Beyond has, apart from the economics part, which we are not very sure, but at least it's publicly not known where the pricing stands. The international sales market, this is the competitive advantage Beyond enjoys versus Impossible is what I discussed a while ago, especially in China and Europe. But China as a market consumes very little beef per capita compared to the US. They're more on pork and poultry. Beyond has launched Beyond Pork in a mincemeat form, so it can be used in dumplings or stir fries, which is a commendable move. At least to me, it seems that they have really thought through the international strategy and launched products accordingly. It's not like, we have a successful product in the US, let's just launch it in China as well. So they have the launching of Beyond Pork shows that they are probably have a well thought out strategy for this market. Europe and China can potentially be much bigger for plant-based meat products than US itself, beyond the setting up production facilities both in China and Europe. And when it comes to unit economics, Beyond has proven that it has hit viable unit economics. If you look at the previous quarters in 2019, 2Q and 3Q is when they reported positive net income. Their operating margins were in double digits. And it looked like, we can grow and still make money. And more importantly, every burger we sell, we make money. We are not losing money. The fear that market had, that is this a concept stock that is pursuing mindless growth and hoping for my valuation based on growth, because the stock is still valued on EV to sales basis. So that is kind of, allayed. I would say the fear is allayed. The company can make profits if it decides to price accordingly. The past few quarters, it had announced that it's going for aggressive discounts and pricing down so that they can reach to a wider market, because customers seem ready for a trial. So these are factors which we think, why we think it is viable as a proposition. But market has overriding concerns on competition from new entrants. Who are the new entrants? There are the big boys like Tyson, Hormel Foods. These are existing meat packers. Almost all the food processing companies that you know of have invested in plant-based foods. Can these deep-pocketed guys come and totally change the market? Personally, I don't see that happening, because one, Beyond and Impossible has targeted a customer base which have bought into this product for some reasons, not just because it's plant-based, but because it is helping solve other issues, which we discussed earlier. And they have been consistently working on refining this product and its economics for the past decade. So new entrants have a long way to go, and both the incumbent food processors and the meat packers lack a moral ground to address the kind of consumer segment that Beyond and Impossible have built so far. Because they already have businesses in the animal product segment, which is much bigger. So obviously they cannot be arguing against that. So it's like we also have a piece in this. We would like to have a piece in this pie. It's almost there. I don't see them being very aggressive. Competition from lab-based meat, if and when it happens, when it becomes a commercially viable product, I think it will start chipping more at the animal meat market than at the plant-based meat products, in my view. Now, if it could truly become the future of protein, which that has more potential, it can chip into the livestock rearing industry more than plant-based meat can ever do. Because from a taste perspective, from a nutrition perspective, I think there will be limitations where plant-based meat can mimic lab-based meat from available technologies. But if plant-based as a customer value, as a customer preference stays, then which will stay for a good part of the population, these guys also have a market, so they will coexist with each other. The market, the segment for alternative protein will be much bigger when lab-based gets commercial. Lastly, competition from Impossible Foods. It is real, and if you have tried both the products, to me it is indisputable that Impossible's products win hands down in a blind taste test. There are many blind taste test results that have been published in media. Impossible tops all of them. Personally, I found Impossible's product almost indistinguishable from an animal meat product, but Beyond will not come that close. But it has a genetically modified ingredient, which is heme, which is core to its taste appeal. So many customers aren't okay with it, because here the customer base is a more health conscious and the woke customer we are talking about. And Beyond also has an appeal in the West for its no soy label. So for now, Beyond has its own unique positioning vis-a-vis Impossible, but it will have to take the competition. I think both will continue to compete, continue to work on their unit economics and appeal to the institutional segment. That's a competition you cannot wish away. Concerns on sustainable growth and profitability. This is what we discussed earlier. We had a peak view of this happening in 2019. We can only hope that things settle for the better this year, and we have a return to profitability with growth. I don't think investors will like the stock without growth. Lastly, let's look at the competitive landscape. almost all the incumbent food processing companies have acquired a plant-based protein player. Almost all these brands which you see here were acquired by the original company or the bigger company's logo, which I have put in there. But unlike the pure plays, as I discussed, they are conflicted when it comes to aggressively promoting this segment because, or even the causes these products stand for, because they have a much bigger animal product segment to take care of. The focus for Beyond and Impossible will be in the what we call the pure play segment. And here, if you look at the pricing, the comparison for pricing is slightly on the expensive side for now. So it is still not a product that will have mass appeal from an affordability perspective. We have many new players entering this segment. This year, we had Shen Meat in China launching its products. I have not had a chance to try it, so I have no comments. But there were favorable reviews online. Omni Meat is available in Singapore. It is quite close to the real thing. You can make a dumpling and you wouldn't make out, but it's poultry that's available here. So this is the segment which will be the competitive landscape for Beyond for all practical purposes to my mind. The one on the right is almost close to a vegetarian product than a plant-based meat product in terms when we discuss the meatier part of it. So what is the real risk? I think there's a product risk every time you talk about a single product company, especially a young company. It is a new product made from processed pea protein for Beyond and processed soya protein and heme for Impossible. The highly health conscious customer base can sway quite quickly if tomorrow some study says that, okay, this can cause health issues. Already there were questions being raised on why is Beyond using canola oil in its products, because canola is a highly processed oil, unlike olive oil or coconut oil, which is more purer. So this is a black swan case, but to my mind, it is something investors have to keep in the back of the mind. So others are ongoing, risks of any regular business, but this is something specific, I would think. To sum up, I would say that Beyond has managed to build a brand in a niche segment with attractive growth potential. It has visible avenues of growth in the near term, and its premium valuation, I think, blame it on scarcity premium. It's the only pure play equity in this segment for now. And it fits well into the investor need where they are looking for businesses that can positively impact the environment. In this case, in Beyond's case, is by reducing meat consumption. And the stock has been highly volatile thanks to its relatively small size and high short interest. So that's it from us on the emerging alternative protein scene and Beyond Meat's place there. We'll be happy to discuss if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Devi, for this really good overview of the company and as well as the space, actually. In fact, I will agree with you that Impossible is probably the best of the two when it comes to reminding you of the real thing, but Beyond, I think, achieves its kind of unique flavor without being a copy. So, Devi, you mentioned how the stock is quite volatile, and it's true that we did see a jump recently. And I was wondering, what do you think it shows for the company and what investors think about it in 2021 as we get started?
Yeah, the stock has always been highly volatile based on news flows. To my mind, it's because many investors don't have a long-term visibility on the stock. So they think, every time you have a new information on an institutional tie-up, the stock bounces back. But the company has guided towards what kind of capacity they're building and what kind of growth they're forecasting. So that's where we come in this USD 1 billion sales in 2022. This could have been slightly earlier, if not what happened last year, that is 2020, when institutional sales tanked because of the restrictions faced by the restaurant sector. So I feel many long-term investors are probably just staying there, but there's a lot of investors who play around in the stock because of its volatility and the high short interest. So you wait for the bottom range and buy. And if you're a long-term investor, stay. Otherwise, you exit at the top range. Structurally, I don't think too many things changing, but you will have this news flow fluctuations happening.
Right. You also mentioned that one of the primary competitors at the moment seems to be from the lab-based meat space. And you also mentioned that we've seen, the first perhaps iteration of the technology of the product rather in Singapore, and which comes from the company Eat Just, if I'm not mistaken. So do you think that going forward, this will turn into serious competition for companies like Beyond and Impossible? Or do you think that they can sort of run concurrently and serve different needs?
If lab-based does indeed become commercially viable, which they seem to be very confident of given the number of players who are in the space. And if you look at the logic they are putting forth, which is they say a cow is a converter of grass into protein, but a very inefficient converter because in the process it takes up too much energy, it produces too much greenhouse gases, and it corrects so much of problem on our environment. So why not create a converter which is far more efficient? So you take a cell from a cow, place it in a medium, place it in a bioreactor, and let it grow. So this is stem cell to my mind. This is what we are trying to do it in other areas in the medical space. So let it grow, and they found that it grows in a certain amount of time. And if they can shorten the amount of time, and if they can improve its texture, you are actually getting a muscle structure out of it. So which is different from a plant-based product where you are just extruding some protein into a texture which is similar to meat. So you're getting a muscle structure and you can serve it as a piece of meat. Now, maybe next generation will be okay with that idea. No? Why should I go for this totally unethical thing of, rearing an animal and then chopping it off its head off? I mean, if any of you have ever seen an animal being killed, I don't know how many of you will actually eat it. Almost everyone I asked to, they said they just buy a cut piece from the supermarket. They've never ever killed one. But I have seen it. As a kid, I grew up in a farm. I have seen birds being plucked. But if you're exposed to it as a 3-year-old, you don't feel anything wrong about it. You think this is how the world works. But most of my friends, they never touched a piece of meat, raw meat, until they were in their late teens, probably. So they said they can never imagine killing one or touching blood before eating a meat. So
I guess potentially the Beyond and Impossible can continue serving vegan-oriented
yes,
audiences, even if lab-based meat
yes, that is
blows up in a sense.
yes. My view is that the lab-based meat will, if it happens, will expand the market of alternative protein immensely
Yeah.
than what plant-based alone could do. So it is not in direct
Um,
competition, but it will, in some way affect each other.
mhm. One question from the audience mentions J.P. Morgan's bearish report on Beyond. What do you think about that?
If you can tell me the arguments JP Morgan has. I have not seen the JP Morgan report.
Right. Basically, the quick one is commodity cost and slowing sales.
See, what happened in 2020 was not anticipated, but the market overreacted when there was a retail run on these products. Early 2020, when you had meat packers having a severe disruption because workers in their plants were affected with COVID, so they had to shut down plants. So there was a disruption in supply of meat products to the ales. So there was a panic buying, and people were willing to buy anything. So they just went and bought anything that was available in the protein meat section, including Impossible and Beyond, which many of them didn't even know about or have never tried before. So there was an overreaction, and the stock went all the way to 190 plus because they thought, this will totally change the fortunes of the company. But they forgot the fact that the biggest chunk of the sales came from institutional. We had written it about in one of our reports that the increase in sales from retail cannot compensate for the loss of sales from institutional because all the restaurants were shut down. Even when they reopened, they were running on a limited menu given the restrictions they had in place, which means they didn't have all those fringe products like plant-based. They were selling their core, most popular range. So there was a deep disappointment when the next set of results came out because the sales weren't good enough. So it's not slowing of sales in a long-term trend trajectory, but versus expectation, it was slowing because they thought it has, because of pandemic, the stock is gonna, the company's prospects is gonna change significantly for the better, which didn't happen because of the loss in institutional sales. So I don't think structurally the company will, see a degrowth, or will it grow at a slower pace than it did in the past? Probably yes, because given the size. But probably no too, because if they are able to make it well in Europe and China, give them a year, then probably sales will pick up at a different pace than even market is expecting right now. So I wouldn't worry too much about the potential for growth. Yeah, it is dependent on how well they tackle these two segments, which is institutional and international. They cannot stay
I
a
see.
US only company and then hope for the kind of growth they have had.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned in your most recent note as well how Beyond has established partnerships with companies in China such as Yum and Starbucks China,
Yeah.
which are companies that you also talked about in your previous webinar as well. Have you seen, or rather, what is your view of those companies now after it seems like the worst of the pandemic is over, especially in China?
Starbucks has indeed surprised everyone. My initial view was that players like Starbucks, their key value proposition was being the third place, but then during pandemic you couldn't even stay in the store. Still, the company
Right.
managed very well. So it is lack of insight into customer minds that made me make that short-termish view, I think, because almost everyone thought coffee was something, when everything changed around you, you wanted something to be stable, and a Starbucks coffee was something that made you feel like, there is something that is normal with our lives. So that stock has done phenomenally well, and kudos to the management. They knew how to pivot well in each markets. And in China, especially their plant-based products reportedly did quite well, given the pandemic had animal meat associations, and increased customer health consciousness also meant, many of them wanted to choose plant-based. And you have a Beyond Burger product, Beyond Meat product, which tasted like meat but was plant-based. So
Yeah.
I think it has worked well. Now that the pandemic, even the early stages of recovery itself, these companies were showing stronger recovery than one would have expected.
I guess the cultural sensitivity that Beyond shows is a major factor as well, that you also talked about today. In your research, is Beyond kind of unique in that sense, or does it seem like other companies in the sector are paying attention to that factor?
So Omnipok is a very successful player, which is promoted by a social venture called Green Monday based out of Hong Kong. And since their target was anyway Asia, they started off with the pork product and the chicken product, which is more widely consumed in this part. So I think these companies are quite sensitive about, or quite conscious about, the demands in these markets. And they probably, companies like Beyond probably were developing a pork product right from the beginning, but they didn't want to launch it in the US, given that's not where the real meat lies there. So they reserved it for China, and that makes me think that, okay, these guys have thought through the strategy. In the past, many Western players, when they launch in Asia, they will just copy paste the product. They wouldn't think. That has left many white spaces, as they say, in the consumer segment.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's why I spoke positively about Beyond's launch in China, but it's really too early to know how well they have done, because it's only launched in November 2020, the Beyond Pork product. The Beyond Beef product was launched earlier as tie-up with the institutional segment, but beef is not a big segment in that country.
Wait and see then. And finally, just to wrap up, do you see a consolidation in the space going forward, considering the larger players that have come in recent times, or do you see Impossible and Beyond being able to grow independently in their space?
The consolidation in terms of acquisitions have already happened. Many niche players were acquired by the bigger boys. So if you look at the earlier slide, Vegetarian Butcher was a well-regarded plant-based meat product player from Europe. Now that's been acquired by Unilever, you don't hear much about it. So that level of consolidation has happened even before the market for plant-based was got into this level of growth. But we would still see new players coming in. I think this place is quite active with a lot of funding available. Will all of them be able to match and come up with a product that is both commercially viable and appeals to customers? I think that could take time unless it's like niche players. Like we have a player in Thailand who've launched during the pandemic. We have one in Japan. So those are markets. Those are regional markets with regional needs. So I think the space will be active.
Mm-hmm.
But Impossible and Beyond has managed to brand their products well, have very high visibility without spending too much on advertisement. So I think that is the advantage they will have apart from their product development.
Well, we'll definitely be looking forward to more coverage from you as you continue watching this space. Thank you very much, Devi, for your time today, and thank you everyone for being with us. If you would like to engage with Devi directly, please contact your Smartkarma account manager and they will be able to help you out with that. And if you have any other questions, please email us at research@smartkarma.com. Devi, thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Michael.